Welcome to Twin Talk Politics. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Twin Talk Politics. And today we are joined by the wonderful MLA Botterell, who is a member of Legislative Assembly for Saanich North and the Islands. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be on board.
Yeah, the pleasure's all ours. So as you probably know, we actually have a pretty cemented tradition on our podcast where the first question is always a 50-50 guessing challenge of who is Jason and who is Jerry. And more than half of our guests actually get it wrong, so there's really no pressure.
So you must be Jason.
Unfortunately, that's wrong. I'm Jason, the one with the orange background. I'm slightly chubbier, and that's Jerry in the blue background. No worries at all. Now that you do know how to tell us apart, let's just jump
But
straight
I'm
in.
batting 50-50. This is great. In
Yeah, I'm
baseball,
the more handsome one.
I'd be a hero.
Yeah. Great. Now Jerry and I know are well aware of all the incredible work you've done for British Columbia, but for listeners at home who might not be as familiar with who you are, we were just wondering if you could start by introducing yourself and maybe sharing how your journey into politics began.
Sure, yeah. So I grew up in Victoria and Victoria, BC, and then went off and uh, did a degree at UBC and went off and was the financial controller for the TD Bank. And then after that, I went back to law school at UVic and I practiced Indigenous law for 25 years and did a bunch of work in between with the provincial government. And, last about a little over a year ago, I retired and I had this plan to sail up to Haida Gwaii and
Wow.
we ended up at Quadra Island, and I heard that the MLA Adam Olson, who is my predecessor,
Yeah.
was stepping down. And so I thought, wow, what a great way to give back. I'm going to take a run at that. And here we are.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll definitely be touching upon your legal advocacy a little bit later. But our second question that we would love to ask you actually comes in two parts. So, firstly, we're wondering, what do you think are the most pressing problems concerning youth in BC as a whole right now? And secondly, what do you think are the most paramount issues for youth in your own constituency of Saanich North and the Islands?
Well, in terms of for youth, certainly what I'm hearing from youth is that we really need to put a lot more emphasis and resources into the education systems we have. And why shouldn't we have free tuition? And why shouldn't we be making a much greater effort to support youth? And then that ties really to something that you're both working on and something that I'm working on, which is, and you taught me this, is my runway is pretty short. Your runway is pretty long, and we really need to make sure that youth have an opportunity to be much more engaged in the decisions that affect them. And so we'll talk a bit about this later, but I'm really keen to make sure that youth are fully engaged in all of our democratic processes.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll definitely be touching upon that a little bit later on in the episode. But for now, we know that even before you step foot into the legislature, you're already shaping the lives of British Columbians through your public service. And I think one standout example is your leadership in the BC's Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. And it's a landmark law designed to enhance timely public access, transparency, and accountability in government. And we were wondering if you could take us through what the most serious accountability failures you witnessed at the time were and how your team structured the legislation to address them.
Yeah, so back a long time ago in 1991, uh, Mike Harcourt was elected premier, and he ran on a platform of building the most open freedom of information and strongest protection of privacy legislation in Canada. And at that time, I was working for the BC government,
Mhm.
and I was asked by Attorney General Colin Gableman
Wow.
to build the legislation. And when government wants to do something, it can go fast. The election was in the fall, and by the spring, we were introducing the legislation. The strength of the legislation was that it actually for the first time opened up public access to information about government decisions.
Mhm.
And before then, it was just a great big black box. And so learning about the policy advice that was relied on, or really just having information about MLA expenses and travel and other indicators of whether they're really being responsible with the taxpayers' money, but also the background around big decisions. So knowing more about, for example, how the Site C decision was made, without freedom of information, you wouldn't have any of that. So for me, it was a real opportunity to play a small role in fashioning that.
Thank you so much on your advocacy work. As you said, having a transparent system where taxpayers and constituents have a clear access to that information is pretty important. So thank you again for that. The next question then we wanted to ask is that we know there's a common misconception that the Green Party focuses solely on environmental issues. And while you and MLA Valirit have fought pretty tirelessly, whether it's advancing a clean energy economy to anti-greenwashing bills to protect our water and our forests, we also know your work extends far, far beyond that. So we were just wondering if you could please share a more holistic overview of what the Provincial Green Party represents, and maybe what are some of your top priorities going into the next sitting?
Sure, yeah, great question. I guess the way to summarize it is we don't think it's a choice. We think that you can put people and the environment first. And then, in fact, if you're really building a green economy in a good way, you're also really helping out those most impacted, the most vulnerable in society. And so, in the last election and through the session, we have the spring session, we really focused on all of the issues, affordable housing, actual health care. Why shouldn't everybody have strong primary care? And yeah, we obviously pressed the government a lot on environmental issues
Right,
like
right.
its decision to abandon the carbon tax. Um, and coming into the fall, it'll be the same approach. We really want to be the voice of the voice of constituents in the legislature. Um, speaking truth to power on a range of issues. And I guess another misconception is that we're like, oh, it's the environment over everything, and we're spendthrifts. We're really concerned about fiscal responsibility, and we actually see everything connected. Doing the right thing by the environment and doing the right thing by the working people, the people that are just trying to make ends meet, that's all connected. And it isn't a question of one or the other. And it doesn't have to be involving having huge deficits. So we're actually trying to fill that space of pragmatic, forward-looking policies that address both the environment and the needs of British Columbians generally.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And just breaking that dichotomy and showing that you can protect both the constituents and the environment is definitely important for people to understand, especially coming into the next sitting. Now, what we specifically actually wanted to talk to you about was Bill 15, which recently received royal assent. And I'm sure MLA Botterell will explain this far better than I can. But at its core, this bill allows the provincial government to fast track major infrastructural projects by overriding local bylaws, environmental reviews, permitting processes, and it grants the cabinet the authority to bypass municipal and Indigenous consultations by declaring projects as provincially significant. And for clarity, it just parallels C5, but on a more provincial level. We know that you've actually been a very strong critic of the bill, arguing that Indigenous communities were not meaningfully consulted, and it masks deeper structural issues. So we are wondering, could you walk us through your concerns and what long-term ramifications you foresee, especially pertaining to Indigenous rights and governance?
Yeah, so the concern in terms of Indigenous involvement in this legislation is that we live in an era of UNDRIP and the Declaration Act where we actually have to work together and find that path forward that both enables non-Indigenous peoples needs to be met, but also, really factors in Indigenous interests and concerns. And so this legislation was rushed through, and there was no consultation of any significance with First Nations. They were just basically left out. And that's breaking the trust with nations because we've spent a lot of time to try and get to the point where we're working together. And in one fell swoop, the government undid that trust, and now we're going to spend a lot of time rebuilding it. But the main point about the legislation is its concentration of power in the premier's office.
Yeah,
And that lack of accountability and that ability for cabinet to do all sorts of things that impact the environment and Indigenous rights without proper consultation involvement, I don't want to overstate it, but we see what's happened south of the border when the
yeah,
checks and balances are removed. So, as the Green Party, we said, you know what? We need a registry so we can see what's happening, and we need oversight. We need oversight of a special committee or an all-party committee.
yeah.
We understand the need to move fast, but we need the checks and balances, and we were just stonewalled on that.
Yeah, for sure. And just continuing on the conversation about Indigenous governance, I think as you mentioned at the beginning, you've done extensive work in Indigenous law, including negotiating key treaty provisions, which gives you a deeply formed and I'd say expert perspective on Indigenous issues. So we're just wondering, what did and do you see as the major challenges plaguing Indigenous communities today, and how can both government and citizens work to address them?
Uh, well, what we're trying to undo is a horrific 150, 170 years of government simply trying to uh, erase the Indigenous presence in this land we live in. And fortunately, because of UNDRIP and because of the actions of recent governments, we've started to rebuild that trust and that work. The path forward requires much stronger leadership from the province, and it requires resourcing of nations so that they can become, on their own terms, full partners in Canada. And that's completely doable. But it can't be sort of band-aid solutions, and we have to be really respectful that, there's different Indigenous nations around the province. They're not all the same, just like municipalities aren't all the same
Yeah,
and provinces aren't all the same. So we really need to devote the resources to build the relationships because ultimately we all want the same thing. We want proper housing, proper education. We want an actual meaningful say in how the province advances from here.
for sure. Thank you so much for actually talking about that because I think it's really important to recognize, as you said, to not just have one big blanket solution for all Indigenous communities, but actually individualizing the care and the need and the resources to each community. So thank you for that. Just shifting topics a little bit, I think
Sure.
one of the concerns top of mind for all Canadians, including British Columbians, is the tariffs imposed by, the United States. And earlier this year, the BC NDP and BC Greens actually signed an accord similar in spirit to the one in 2017 that commits the government to prior meaningful consultations with your party, the Green Party, on tariff response policies. And I think, if I'm getting this right, with more than 245 million already set aside for, sort of the shared initiatives there. And though some measures still probably require new spending and more clear price tags, how do you see this clause in collaboration changing the way that BC actually responds to tariffs, and what values or priorities will the Greens be bring into those tariffs discussions?
Well, it's something that we do we aim to do every day of the week. And what we do is we want to bring the pieces to those discussions that are missing. So when we're considering tariff response, we want to make sure, and we work hard to do this, to make sure that the environment, that Indigenous rights, that the needs of people working every day to try and make the next rent check, that those aren't sacrificed in the effort to deal with tariffs and the tariff response. So that's the basic approach. We try and make sure that those concerns are still front and center, and we'll see how that works out over the next couple of years. But the government well knows the importance of those, and through the agreement, we can really advocate for those quite strongly. At the end of the day, we don't hold the balance of power, so we
Mhm.
we do the best we can with what we have.
Yeah. For sure. Thank you so much for that. And then for the last part of the interview, we're gonna sort of switch gears a little bit and talk a lot more about youth. And as we had the ultimate pleasure of at discussing at the Special Committee on Democratic and Electoral Reform, of which MLA Botterell is an essential committee member. As you probably know, and as we sort of talked about, there has unfortunately been a significant decline in youth engagement all around Canada, but also specifically in BC over the past couple of years. So our question is just, in your opinion, in what ways or aspects can the youth become more engaged within the political sphere?
Great question. I think that what we have to do is first of all reduce the voting age, and so that actually formalizes the opportunity right from age 16 to be involved in the political process and political decisions. But accompanying that, and I gotta say, I've learned a lot from your presentation. So, if
Thank
some of
you.
this sounds familiar, you can say, "Oh yeah, that he got that idea from us." But that we don't do nearly enough work on civic education, civics courses, actual work with students and youth in terms of how the process works and critical thinking, and then actually finding ways through things like citizens assemblies and other mechanisms to have a much more direct engagement with youth on changes that are needed and policies that are needed. So, on the Democratic and Electoral Reform Special Committee, I'll certainly be really pressing hard for actual concrete changes that really help and facilitate youth being more involved. And, when we've talked to a bunch of presenters and others about this, um, there's sometimes a misconception that youth are turned off politics. I think it's the exact reverse. I think that youth are incredibly engaged and have really well thought out ideas and perspectives on what's needed. And what we need to do is find a way to really build that into our governance systems, because that's a huge amount of energy and insight that we're missing right now.
For Yeah, for sure. sure. And just building off that conversation, we're just wondering if you can give us a little sneak peek on the sentiment in the legislature, and if MLAs are open to the fact of extending the voting age to 16, or are they a little bit more passive and a little bit more hesitant to accept it?
Well, as soon as they meet you both, they'll be voting yes. So you just have to meet every
Thank you.
MLA this fall. But no, seriously, I mean, the work where we're at is the special committee has almost 1,000 submissions to go
Yeah,
through.
yeah.
In mid-September, we start deliberating. And I can say for a fact that everybody on the committee is approaching their work with an open mind and willing to be convinced.
Mhm.
So, the work we do over the course of the fall will tell the story in terms of what the recommendations of the committee are. There's no real sneak preview yet
Yeah.
because
All right.
mid-September is when we start deliberating.
Cool.
But I can say I've been really encouraged by all of the members of the committee and their willingness to seriously consider reducing the voting age, for example, and expanding engagement and involvement of youth in the democratic system. So I'm very hopeful we'll get to yes. And then the next step will be to get the government to yes to implement the recommendations. So it's sort of a two-step.
For sure. Fingers crossed it does go through. All right. For the second to last question before a fun
Sure. Yeah.
question at
Yeah.
the end,
Yeah.
we're just wondering if you could give one piece of advice to all young Canadians listening right now. What would your one piece of advice be?
Uh, that's a re-
I know
there's so
sorry to
many
hit you with a
things I
curveball
could
there.
say. Uh, Keep hopeful. There is so much exciting opportunity in this country, and there is every reason to be optimistic about the future of this country. And if there's one thing you can do is get engaged and be part of that exciting future. There's lots of doom and gloom around, but you know what? This is a really exciting time where we can see major positive changes and be part of it. That's my message. Be part of it.
Cool, yeah. Thank you so much for that inspiring message. And hopefully more youth will be part of the growing movement. So we kind of always save, I guess, the hardest challenge or I guess the hardest question for the end. So we
Sure.
know you've done some pretty amazing challenges and initiatives, which viewers, if you're interested, you can find it on MLA Botterell's social media, I think specifically Instagram. But you've done challenges such as the Capital Bike commuter challenge to promote sustainable travel, and our favorite, the Gen Z slang to encourage youth, and painting to see how artsy you are. I think it was a painting challenge between you and MLA Valeriat, and it reminded me a lot of Van Gogh and Picasso, if I can say so myself, among so many others. So we were wondering which one of these fun challenges has been your favorite and why?
Well, I love the bike challenge. So I was driving to the ledge, and Jeremy was biking,
Yeah.
and he just thumped me. But it was a lot of fun, and the reason it was a lot of fun was driving through all the traffic and sort of all the stoplights and everything, and just sort of going at a certain point. You know what? I should have a bike, not a car. And it for us as Greens, I mean, it really reminded us that the future is in transit, free, fast, and frequent transit, and to get everybody out of the cars. But for me, that was a lot of fun. It was a great way to start the day. It was just a fabulous way to start the day.
Cool. Thank you so much. And for the listeners at home, it's super fun and super exciting to as a viewer to watch that. So if you haven't checked it already, please go check it out. All right. I think that concludes our interview today. Again, Jerry and I would like to extend such a big thank you to MLA Botterell and also his phenomenal team, Mr. Hook, for this amazing opportunity and taking the time out of his insanely busy, like super busy schedule to come here and meet with us today. We truly appreciate it. And for all the listeners and viewers at home, if you guys wish to see more interviews like this, be sure to tune into future episodes. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you guys next time.